Thank you for joining us for another opportunity of fellowship with This Is My Story, testimonies that move the soul. Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to be able to join you once again for another opportunity to share with This Is My Story, testimonies that move the soul. I'm so delighted to be able to join you. And this afternoon, I have the pleasure of welcoming someone who is not a stranger to some of you, and then to others you're being introduced for the first time, retired Chief Jerry Austin. Now, you may have noticed that on our website, thisismystoryministry.com, there are a couple of other videos that are in place where you can choose to watch them at your convenience. But this afternoon, we have the opportunity to hear him focus on highlights from his career as a fireman. Could you believe that in the 1980s, 70s, maybe even 60s, something that was very rare to have been visualized by a young person at that time was someone who looked like him in the fire department? Well, you'll find out a little bit about why. Why is that in Orange County, an African American such as the likes of retired Chief Jerry Austin was not visible? Well, that's just one of many firsts that he has to share with us. It's such a delight to be able to come before you and share from week to week. And if you missed any of them, try to catch up, binge out one afternoon on This Is My Story. I'm certain you'll find something that encourages you in the journey and reminds you God is able to see us. Well, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome my other half, retired Chief Jerry Austin. A other half, because some of you may not know, I am Mrs. Austin, Debbie Austin. And as I say with some of my friends, that calls for a snap. We'll find out more about that snap later. But would you join me in welcoming retired Chief Jerry Austin for our brief time of fellowship this afternoon?
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Well, it's always a pleasure to join my wife in celebrating her program. I think that is a wonderful program. It also offers a lot of good life learned information for those of us who love to tell things about what we have experienced. She asked me to share with you a couple of the stories that I can remember in regards to my career. Well, firefighting is a very, very dangerous job. I would say it is extremely dangerous because over the years, we lose probably more than 100 firefighters a year. One of the reasons why I bring this up is because I experienced a near death, I would say, and not really realizing that it was a near death experience for me fighting fire. When I first became a firefighter, I was considered a rookie. Of course, being a rookie, you always want to be the one that's first in and making sure that you can prove yourself, make sure that you can do it in a manner that you've been trained. And that I remember one of the incidents we had, which was an industrial fire. And it just so happened that was one of those times. Well, of course, yours truly was the one who wanted the nozzle to go in first. So that is what happened. I'm crawling in and I'm anxious. My adrenaline is high. I'm excited. I remember when the captain ordered me to open up the nozzle so that we can get to the seat of the fire. And of course, it was completely dark. We couldn't see anything other than the red flames. And of course, I could hear my counterparts when my captain was directing and telling us what to do. Well, as I'm crawling in to this industrial building, I realized that I was just a little ahead of everyone, and I hit this this wall. And of course, I'm thinking, okay, I need to back out. Well, I turned to my right, I hit my head again. I said, okay. And I turned to the left, I hit my head again. I tried to stand up, I hit my head again. So sure enough, I had found myself underneath a desk. Well, by the time I realized, I began to back out, didn't hear anyone else. I didn't see anyone else. And so all I heard was the flames. And so, of course, I realized that I was alone. And not only that, but I realized that I was in a situation I'd never been in before. So I could have either done one of two things. I could have panicked, like my body was telling me, you got to get out of here, you got to get out of here. Or I could remember what what they had trained me to do in a situation like this in the fire academy. So sure enough, my memory calmed. I began to think about that. And I said, okay, I know we brought the hose in one way, so I'll put the nozzle down, straddle the hose, and I'll crawl my way back. Well, as I'm crawling my way back, I could hear voices, and the voices in the background were saying, where's Jerry? Where is Jerry? And all of a sudden, as I'm crawling, I see the light, and that light was coming from the doorway. And as I'm crawling, all of a sudden, a hand reached in and grabbed my turnout jacket, turned me on my back, and began to pull me out of that building. As I'm laying on my back, I can see the flames. It goes up, then it comes back down all together, just like that. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We call that a flashover. In other words, everything in that building, in that room, in that area had reached its ignition temperature. And when that happens, we have what is called a flashover. Well, as I'm being pulled out, I see this flame, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I realized, I said, wow. As I got outside, I was too young to realize and understand that I had come that close, because no one survives a flashover. I had come that close to losing my life. You know, being young, sometimes we take a lot of chances and we forget that it's the grace of God that had his hands on my life that night that prevent that. So anyway, that was one of the incidents that I experienced. And of course, I truly began to understand, how fire burns and how it works and what we need to do to be really, really careful. We have to be able to read certain signs. And my captain had read the signs to get out, but I was moving so fast and on the interior of that building that, of course, I did not hear him say evacuate. And then that's how I got behind. And of course, I ended up under a desk inside that building as well. So anyway, that is one of the incidents. Another one that I'd like to share with you is very interesting. Now, this one has to do with personalities. It was interesting. I was a fire inspector for 5 years. And one of the inspections that I recall going on was a storage facility. Well, as a fire inspector, one of the things that we have to do is we have to inspect storage facilities as well. We have to make sure people are not living in them. We have to make sure that there's nothing that's very dangerous. Just so happened as I'm about 100 degrees, 102 degrees that particular day. And I'm inspecting a storage facility. And what was very interesting was the fact that I noticed this green substance coming from underneath the roll-up door of one of the units. So I asked the manager, I said, would you please open that for me? I like to see what's going on in there. And sure enough, as he opened it, it was nothing but chemicals everywhere. I mean, chemicals everywhere. And as I looked, it appeared that some had waste and dropped, and the bottle had cracked and it was leaking. And I asked the manager, I said, what is going on here? And obviously It was someone's storage facility where they had all these different types of chemicals. Well, I began to read the ones that were leaking and that had fallen on the floor, and it said picric acid. Well, in my field at the time, we didn't have a hazardous material team. And because we didn't, we used the county bomb squad to come and check things. Well, for some reason, I've been doing some reading earlier and I had on chemicals. And just so happened, I read about picric acid. Well, picric acid is what they call the poor man's. And this man by the name of Pickrick is the one who discovered it. Well, one of the things that I saw that was very interesting about picric acid when I compare it with other chemical compounds is that picric acid is one radical from TNT. So the formula for TNT, you have one radical different on picric acid, which means if picric acid if it overheats, if it crystallizes, if it is shock sensitive, all of these things can cause picric acid to explode. So in other words, under the circumstances that I recognized that day, picric acid was in the same category as dynamite. And all we needed was the right element to create a problem. Remember, 102 degrees outside, which means if we had an earthquake or if we had anything that disturbed that material, it has the potential of exploding. And I knew that it was going to be something very unique. So I got on the radio immediately, called dispatch, and I asked them to please have the bomb squad respond, and also the local battalion chief in that district. Battalion chief gets there first. I explained to him. He said, "Hey, this guy was one of those. How do I describe him? He was sort of had a little pot belly, had his cowboy boots on, and his cowboy buckle, and he basically was one of those individuals." So he walks up to me and says, "Okay," he says, "Boy, what you got?" That's what he said. "Boy, what you got?" I told him, explained to him the situation, and I said, "I've already contacted the bomb squad to respond, and I really think we need to take this really serious because of the nature of the chemicals." Well, believe it or not, he he walks up to the chemical, he takes his finger and he just puts his finger in it, and he takes it up to his nose and starts smelling it. I said, "Okay, it's time for me to leave." So anyway, I told him, I said, "Well, Chief, I'm going to leave you with this. I'm leaving the scene." Well, I got a call to come back to headquarters. Well, I ended up going back to headquarters, and of course, the operations chief and the fire marshal wanted to speak with me. And I explained to them what I had out there and what the situation was. That's the reason why I requested for the bomb squad. And they said, "Oh, okay." So anyway, that was basically what I told them. And so the battalion chief, the operations chief, called in that battalion chief, talked to him. I don't know what he said to him. I don't know what transpired in their conversation, but I do remember one thing. This particular battalion chief, pretty angry at me, and I really didn't know what I had done. But anyway, he approached me that same day and he said, "Boy, let me tell you something." He says, "As long as I'm on this department, you ain't gonna ever." And I said, "Okay." He looked at me and I looked around and I said, and I wasn't one to always back down. So I said, "Well, Chief," said, "I'll be chief of this department and I'll be on your grave." Well, that didn't go over very well. So he was, he turned red as an apple, and I got out of his way as quickly as possible. Well, anyway, make a long story short, what ended up happening was I ended up getting out of the bureau, the Fire Prevention Bureau, as an inspector, and going back to the line, which we call living in the fire station. And guess who my battalion chief? It was that same battalion chief. Sure enough, he lived up to his word. Every time I would go for a promotion, he was on the board. And I tell you, I never, ever was able to achieve it with him there. Well, one day he finally decided he was going to retire. And I was one happy camper that he was going to retire. unfortunately for him, the first day of his retirement, he was murdered. The sad part about that is he never got to spend one day being retired. And so it was very sad that that happened. But I kept my promise about the grave. I kept my promise. But those are some of the things. Those are two of the stories that that comes to my mind. And I tell you one thing that's really really important is that you have to be strong mentally and physically. And one last one that I want to share with you, that is this. I recall when I had taken the engineer's exam, and for whatever reason, I just was not being, well, I was successful in passing the exam, but I ended up in the lower part of the promotional list. And this time, instead of listing uh, the list in numerical order, the chief decided to list it in alphabetical order. Well, with my last name being Austin, of course, guess who was on top of the list? I was. But so I got teased quite a bit by my coworkers saying, "Hey, Austin, hey, I hear you came out #1 on the list." Well, of course, I didn't. Out of a list of 23, I think, oh, I'm sorry, out of a list of 20, came out 17. So I did not come out #1. They teased me anyway, and I went along with it. But I had made up my mind. I said, you know what? I'm gonna do something that is going to really help me. I said, from this time forward, I am never going to come out last or in the bottom half of a promotional exam. Sure enough, I began to study, and I studied very, very. And so I ended up studying, and I decided I was going to use it to my advantage. So every time I would go and visit a station, I would be in the library after 5 o'clock, and I'd be studying. Well, of course, when you work around individuals, they always want to know, what are you doing? So I decided I was going to just study from 5 until time to go to bed, unless the bell goes off, we had an alarm. But I was going to study, and that's what I did. So people would come in and ask me, "Hey, Austin, what are you doing?" I say, "Hey, I'm studying for the next engineer's exam, and I'm coming out #1." I decided to say that because I knew what would happen. They were going to be talking to each other at the stations, and of course at the table, and they would say, "Hey, I was out at stations two the other day, and I saw Austin there. He was working overtime, and he said he was studying for the next engineering exam, and he's coming out #1." I knew that if many of them said that enough, they will believe it. And of course, that's basically the way the fire works. Year goes by, and I've been doing my studying, and I had two individuals come to me and say, "Hey, Jerry, would you mind if we study with you?" Of course, I said, "No problem." Well, anyway, I made a deal with them. I said, "Now listen, uh, you can study with me, but I'm coming out #1, and you two are going to have to fight for the #2 and #3 spot." And so, sure enough, I gave them all the information that I had researched and developed during that one year that I was studying, because the next test was going to be within another year. And so I told them, I said, "Now, if we're going to study, I'll give you everything I have, but we all have to we all have to also share the research that we are assigned." And so they both agreed. It's okay, no problem. So sure enough, that we started our little study group, and I was already a year ahead of them, but that was okay. But they provided me with additional information that I needed to also research in order to be successful. So the time comes about 3 months, 4 months before the test was to be given. I was sitting on top of a fire engine. We were at the city yard getting fuel for the unit. And all of a sudden, the administrative, the deputy chief walks up and says, "Hey, Trouble." Well, that was my nickname. He called me Trouble. And he said, "Hey, Trouble." He said, "The chief wants to talk to you." At first, when he did that, because I was also planning research and development officer, I became that. I thought he wanted me to research something for him, and I just didn't have the time because I was studying for the engineer's exam. So that was kind of my thought process when he walked and approached the fire truck. Says, "The chief is at the headquarters and he's looking for you." So my captain heard that. My captain said, "Okay, we'll be headed back to headquarters very soon." So sure enough, um, we head back to headquarters. We get there. Um, the engine pulls in, and sure enough, the chief was waiting for me at the back door of the headquarters. And I went, whoa. So I get off my engine, walk up to the chief. I said, Chief, um, may I help you with something? And the chief says, congratulations, Engineer Austin. And I'm kind of puzzled. I said, congratulations, Engineer Austin. Yes, believe it or not, the chief performed what we call a field promotion 3 months before the test even was expired. And I made engineer on that list 3 months before the new test was to be given. I ended up working for the battalion chief as his driver, which also for the next 3 to 4 months, which was tremendous amount of experience that I gained, understanding how to command fires and how to make sure that command resources that we needed for different events, just based on me being his driver, the battalion chief driver for those months before I was assigned my unit as an engineer. An engineer is the one who drives the fire trucks and also pumps the water and makes sure that all the equipment and everything is secure on the unit. So that was a positive thing that happened to me. And by the way, the two individuals that studied with me ended up being number 1 and number 2 on the next engineer's test. So it really was a blessing for me and also a blessing for them, for me to work with them and study with them. So those are some of the things that I just wanted to share with you as to being a firefighter, good and bad.
Well, we can tell from Chief Austin's experiences that they are quite interesting. And you have probably figured out that Chief Austin has a way of telling stories unlike any other. They're so riveting, so enticing. They draw you in and you want to hear more and more and more. Well, guess what? We have that opportunity now because have I told you that retired Chief Austin is now a published author? A published author, yes. And I'd like to share with you that you can get his book. Now, I want to draw you back to the website. This is my story testimony ministry. This is my story ministry.com. Let me say that one more time. Kind of got that confused with my own saying. This is my story ministry.com. On that website, you'll find more of these recordings, and you'll also find a link and a little information about retired Chief Austin. And it will also lead you to his link. And there you'll be able to find out more information about how to get the book. Now, if for some reason you haven't had an opportunity to go ahead and go to his link, by all means, contact the wife. Let me know. I think I got a little bit of inside influence to get you what you need to hear more stories like we heard today. So I want to invite you to go to thisismystoryministry.com, hear more stories like this, check out the link and check out the website. If you'd like to get a book before then, feel free to send us a little note and we'll be happy that you support it. And by the way, you should know 10% of the proceeds from the book sale are returned to the LA chapter, Los Angeles Operation Reach Back. One of the oldest, if not the oldest chapter under the umbrella of the National Operation Reach Back organization. And I tell you, what a delight to know that this gentleman is learning to give back, right? Look back, and even reach back. He's supporting with proceeds. So when you buy a book, part of those proceeds are going directly to support a young man, a young woman who's aspiring to make a difference and to be the difference that we would like to see in our young men and women. So no, it's not just lining his pockets, but making. And we want to thank you. Thank you for partnering with us in that regard. We're privileged to be able to work towards something that is so meaningful. Now, our time is done today, but yours doesn't have to end here. You can also partner with us by becoming an Operation Reach Back member. And there's some information on how to do that. Thank you for joining us once again. It has been so nice to have this time of fellowship with you. May the Lord bless and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and grant you and yours peace. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. For more information about this program, This Is My Story, Testimonies That Move the Soul, see us at our website. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.